right, everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're going somewhere a little darker, exploring the psychology behind true crime. You know, all those podcasts and documentaries everyone's hooked on, I have to admit, I get sucked into. But why are we so fascinated by these often tragic and sometimes creepy stories? That's exactly what we're going to unpack today. We're using an excerpt from Why People Are Drawn to True Crime Content, the Psychological and Protective Motivations. And lucky for us, we have our expert here to walk us through all the twists and turns. Now, some of you might be thinking, isn't it a bit morbid to be so interested in these awful events? But I think our expert is going to show us that there's a lot more to it than just morbid curiosity, right?
You're absolutely right. It's way deeper than that. In fact, one of the things we'll see is that true crime can actually trigger a sense of gratitude for our own safety.
Gratitude? Wait, really? That's not exactly the first thing that pops into my head when I think about true crime. How does that work?
Well, think about it. A lot of the stories we hear in true crime involve victims who are in vulnerable situations, maybe walking alone at night or trusting someone they shouldn't have. When we listen to these stories, it can actually spark this feeling of relief, like, "Phew, that wasn't me." It's a way of processing the what-ifs.
I get it. It's like you're almost subconsciously comparing your own life to the victims and feeling thankful that, thankfully, things haven't gone that way for you.
Exactly. But there's this other side to that, this kind of unsettling side. Even though it brings relief, it also highlights just how fragile our safety can be. It reminds us that anyone can become a victim. And, strangely enough, that realization can make us even more fascinated.
Almost like a wake-up call, a little jolt to our sense of security. And it pushes us to pay attention, learn from these stories so we can stay safe ourselves.
Yes. And that leads us to another big motivator, wanting to learn how to avoid those dangerous situations. True crime can be like a cautionary tale, almost a training manual for recognizing red flags.
It's like we're mentally putting ourselves in those situations, right? Thinking, okay, what would I have done? Would I have seen those warning signs? Would I have gotten out?
You got it. We run these mental simulations, figuring out how we'd react, what we'd do differently. And one of the most common things we see in true crime is how people miss those signs of controlling or abusive behavior, particularly in relationships.
Yeah, it's scary how often you hear those stories. Someone seems totally normal, but then you find out they were manipulating or even harming their partner. It really makes you realize how easy it is to miss those signs if you're not actively looking for them.
Right, and that's one of the things true crime does really well. It forces us to confront those uncomfortable truths about human behavior in others, but also in ourselves.
It makes you question your own judgment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Are we overlooking red flags in our own lives? Are we giving people too much benefit of the doubt?
It's like true crime is giving us this crash course in recognizing dangerous patterns, right? Showing us that things aren't always what they seem, that we really need to pay attention to the details.
Absolutely. And sometimes we only see those patterns in hindsight. True crime lets us look back, connect the dots, and see those manipulations, the sudden behavior shifts, the signs of instability that might have been missed in the moment.
So it's more than just the thrill of the mystery or the shock of the crime itself. It's about learning to read between the lines, to see those underlying patterns that might be signaling danger.
Right on. It's about understanding that sometimes the most dangerous individuals are the ones who are best at blending in, appearing harmless. And the better we understand those patterns, the better we can protect ourselves.
That makes total sense. But can you give me a real-life example of how this works? Like, how can true crime actually help us spot those subtle warning signs?
Sure. Let's say you're listening to a true crime podcast, and they're talking about a case where this seemingly harmless interaction takes a dark turn. Maybe it starts with a stranger being a little too friendly, or someone pushing boundaries that make you feel uncomfortable.
I think we've all had those moments, right? That feeling like something is off, but we brush it off because we don't want to seem rude or paranoid.
Exactly. And that's where true crime can be so powerful. It reinforces that we need to trust our gut, pay attention to those feelings, because sometimes those subtle red flags are all we have.
So it's not about living in fear, right? It's about being aware, having the tools to navigate those potentially risky situations.
Exactly. True crime helps refine those tools, makes us more tuned in to human behavior, and ultimately helps us make safer choices.
Okay, I'm seeing how this all ties together, but let's get even more specific. Can you give us some concrete examples from the article about what to watch out for? What kind of situations or behaviors should raise a red flag?
Of course. One thing the article mentions is the importance of being aware of our surroundings. For instance, being alone in secluded areas, especially at night, can make us more vulnerable.
Right. I know I always feel a little more on edge when I'm walking alone in the dark.
And that's a good thing. True crime reminds us to stay vigilant in those situations. Trust your instincts and take precautions, like being aware of who's around you, having a plan if something feels wrong.
Better safe than sorry, right? True crime just reinforces that, but in a way that really makes you think.
Totally. It's not about being paranoid. It's about being informed, empowered to make smart choices. And that empowerment extends to how we interact with others. The article specifically mentions being cautious about engaging with strangers without the right precautions.
Interesting. What kind of precautions are we talking about?
Well, it could be something as simple as not giving out personal information too easily, or being thoughtful about who you're meeting up with and where. Not everyone has good intentions.
It's like a dose of realism. Not distrusting everyone, but being discerning. Realizing that, yeah, some people might try to take advantage.
Exactly. And true crime helps us develop those critical thinking skills so we can assess situations and make smarter choices.
One thing that strikes me about all of this is how true crime is, in a way, about recognizing our own vulnerability. It's not just about the perpetrators and their crimes, but about understanding what makes someone a target.
That's a great point. True crime often shows us situations or behaviors that can unintentionally make us more vulnerable to becoming victims.
So it's not just about avoiding bad people, but also recognizing how our own choices might put us in vulnerable positions.
Exactly. Safety is a two-way street. It's not just hoping bad things won't happen, but actively doing things to protect ourselves.
I like that. It's about taking ownership of our safety, not just leaving it to chance.
Exactly. And that brings us to a key takeaway. True crime gives us knowledge. It helps us make better decisions about safety, big and small.
Knowledge is power, right? And here, that knowledge can literally help keep us safe.
Exactly. It's not about fear or paranoia. It's about being aware, informed, prepared.
Having those strategies, those mental tools to navigate the world safely. But I also feel like it goes beyond just personal safety, doesn't it? It's like true crime can spark bigger conversations about society as a whole.
Absolutely. These stories often expose those systemic failures, biases in the justice system, the way certain groups are more vulnerable to violence.
So while we can definitely learn a lot individually about red flags and protecting ourselves, it also pushes us to think about those bigger societal issues.
Yes, it can be a catalyst for awareness, for advocacy, for social change.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. It really adds a whole other layer to the genre.
It definitely does. And that's what makes it so fascinating to explore. It's not just entertainment, it's about understanding ourselves and the world around us.
So much to think about. It's incredible how something as seemingly simple as, our fascination with true crime can reveal so much about human psychology and our desire for safety and knowledge.
It's a real testament to the power of storytelling. Even the darkest stories can offer us valuable insights and lessons. And there's another aspect to this. You know how people always worry about making the wrong decision, especially about trusting someone? True crime can actually help with that too.
Wait, you mean learning who to trust?
Huh?
I don't quite get it. I mean, true crime is full of stories where people get betrayed by those they thought they could trust, right?
True, but it's not about being suspicious of everyone. It's more about sharpening your judgment. Learning to spot the subtle signs of someone who's trustworthy versus someone who's manipulative.
Okay.
Think about it. True crime often exposes the tactics manipulators use, things like gaslighting or love bombing.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah,
So it's not just this vague warning to be careful who you trust. It's actually showing us specific techniques, like how to recognize manipulation.
exactly. Once you know how to identify those tactics, you're less likely to fall for them.
That's a great way to put it. Like you have a secret decoder ring for human behavior. It makes me think about all those times people say, I never saw it coming. Maybe if they'd been exposed to more true crime, they'd have picked up on those red flags earlier.
Yeah, it's possible. We can't prevent everything bad from happening, of course, but knowledge and awareness can really help lower the risk.
It also makes me think about that whole perfect victim idea that comes up a lot in true crime. This tendency to blame the victim, like they somehow brought it on themselves.
Right, and that's such a harmful idea. True crime can actually help challenge that. By understanding the psychology involved, for both victims and perpetrators, we can push back against those victim-blaming narratives.
It's so important to remember that anyone can become a victim. It
Exactly.
doesn't matter what choices they made or how they behaved.
Exactly. And it's about remembering that the perpetrator is responsible for their own actions. We can't control others, but we can empower ourselves with knowledge and awareness to lower our risk.
And that feeling of empowerment is so key. It's not about living in fear. It's about feeling more confident in the world, more capable of staying safe.
Couldn't agree more. True crime, when we approach it thoughtfully, can really be this powerful tool for personal growth and empowerment.
Yeah, it's like taking back control, writing your own safety story.
Exactly. It's a much better story than the one we often hear about, vulnerability and victimhood.
So to wrap this up, it's not just about the excitement of the mystery or the shock of the crime itself. It's about gaining insights into human behavior, recognizing patterns, and having the knowledge and awareness to make safer choices.
And it's about starting those important conversations about society, challenging victim blaming, and fighting for a safer world for everyone.
You've given us so much to think about today. It's really amazing how something as, seemingly simple as liking true crime can tell us so much about ourselves and the world around us.
It's a fascinating topic for sure. I think it speaks to our natural curiosity about the dark side of human nature, to learn from the mistakes of others and try to make the world safer for ourselves and the people we care about.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dive. Before we go, though, we want to hear from you. Have you ever noticed how true crime can make you rethink your own experiences? Like maybe you listen to this really creepy story and then you're suddenly hyper aware of your surroundings. Or maybe you start wondering if you're missing red flags in your own relationships. What do you think?
It's wild how those stories can get under your skin and change how you see the world, isn't it?
It really is. And for all the true crime fans out there listening, do you think you'll experience your favorite podcasts or documentaries a bit differently after today? Will you be on the lookout for those subtle patterns, those tiny details that could point to something more sinister?
I think having this knowledge can add so much to the whole true crime experience. It's like you're watching with a new perspective, noticing things you might have missed before.
Yeah, like you're an armchair detective piecing together the clues.
And hey, maybe those detective skills will come in handy in real life too. You might start noticing things in people's behavior that you didn't see before, whether it's in your relationships or even at work.
That's so true. It's like true crime is giving us this secret weapon for understanding how people really behave.
At the end of the day, isn't that what it's all about? Understanding ourselves and the world around us a little better.
Yeah,
Even if it means facing some hard truths along the way.
absolutely. Well, we've covered a ton today. I think we've all learned some really valuable things about why we're so drawn to true crime. It's not just morbid curiosity. It's about learning, growing, and ultimately becoming more empowered to make safer choices.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation. Always love diving into these deeper reasons behind the things we enjoy.
Me too. And speaking of fascinating, we've got another exciting deep dive coming up for you next time. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.